Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/KYHistoryPod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and we got another great episode of Kentucky history to talk about. Joined with me again is Mr. James Prichard. How you doing?
Very well. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thanks for coming on again. But for those people who may be hearing this for the first time or hearing you for the first time, give us a little bit about your Kentucky connection and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I supervised the research room at the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives from 1985 till 2008, so close to 25 years. And then I was on the staff at the Filson Historical Society for nearly 10 years. Recently left that organization. I was also a member of the Kentucky Humanities Council Speakers Bureau for approximately a decade in the early part of this century, and I traveled from one end of the state to the other. Done a lot of lectures on the Civil War period, written some articles on the Civil War in popular magazines, book reviews, essays for Civil War anthologies, and I published, or rather I authored, Embattled Capital, Frankfort, Kentucky during the Civil War, which was the first in-depth study of the state capitol during that conflict.
Mm-hmm. And that's the episode. If you want to look back at some episodes, we talked a little bit more about that as well. So today's topic, we're going to talk a little bit about George Prentice. Now,
Yes.
I'll give you a quick spill. What I've found about George Prentice is, he was famous for the Sue Mundy caricature, or however you want to describe that. Back in the Civil War, also was a big instigator of Bloody Monday, which people may not know about, right?
Yes.
However, you're here to change that story, right?
Yes. Yeah. What I'll share with you tonight is based on a lecture I gave at the Filson in 2019, and it was Scapegoat or Devil, George D. Prentice and Bloody Monday. And I gave that talk again for the Louisville Journal Club, and also published a little opinion piece in the Leo community newspaper here on Prentice after his statue was removed because of his controversial connections to Bloody Monday in 2018. And Bloody Monday continues to resonate, probably more than any other event in Louisville history, in the city today, in the memory, historical memory of the city today. And to this day, nearly 170 years after Bloody Monday, Prentice is still talked about. Prentice is still controversial, and Prentice is still vilified. Largely, no surprise, by the descendants of the Irish and German immigrants who were involved, in many cases targeted in the Bloody Monday riots, August 6th, 1855. And of course, this was a state election. This was during the height of a period in which immigration had become a very hot political topic. This is the first time in American history that the nation experienced immigration on a mass scale. And so in 1850, Louisville's population was about 36,000, and over 11,000 of those individuals were German and Irish Catholics. fleeing from the potato famine, from the revolutions of 1848 in Europe. And there was genuine concern among many native born Americans that the arrival of so many Catholics on our shores would have a very negative or nefarious impact on our political institutions. And so in the 1840s, the Native American Party arose. And then in the early 1850s, the Know Nothing Party became quite powerful in the United States. And many former Whigs,
Yeah.
of course, Henry Clay passed in 1852. The party collapsed in about 1854. And so many former Whigs were now men without a party. And George Prentice, the editor of the Louisville Daily Journal, was the man of was a man, a political journalist
Yeah.
without a political party.
Mhm.
So people these days remark on news bias, but in that era, and well, probably dating back to the election of 1800, all the way up into the 20th century, most communities, most cities had more than one
Multiple.
newspaper
Yeah.
that promoted one political party, and then there would be a rival newspaper in the same city. That was the case with Prentice. His Louisville Daily Journal was probably one of the leading Whig party newspapers in the nation. And then, of course, the Louisville Democrat was originally the Jacksonian newspaper, and then the Louisville Courier was initially a cotton Whig newspaper, which showed the split in the Whig Party in the 1850s into Northern and Southern rights factions. So again, with the collapse of the Whig Party, why Prentice, uh, John J. Crittenden, and
Mhm.
other prominent Whigs throughout the land, and of course in Kentucky, were men without a party.
Yeah. And some other just, side notes about, Prentice is, like, his Louisville Journal and the Louisville Courier would eventually become the Courier Journal that you have today, and so forth. And the other thing with Prentice, he was a very great writer for his time, I guess. Is that
Yes,
fair?
he was known for his acid dip pen and for these small squibs that ridiculed political opponents or his editorial opponents. And so he was as famous in America for his wit and humor, also a minor poet, and he promoted the careers of a lot of poets in antebellum America. So yeah, he was a household name in the United States at that particular time.
Yeah, and that, piggybacks on the idea, or at least my thought of, like, how big and important Kentucky was during that antebellum time. A lot of big time political players from Kentucky, nationwide and in the state as well. But Prentice, you know, he was a mainstream guy. I mean, he had his name out there.
Absolutely, he was, for want of a better way to put it, Henry Clay's hatchet man. You know, and of course, Henry Clay was a towering figure in American politics in the antebellum era. But Prentice, again, his career started. He was a native of Connecticut. He was born there in 1802, and he was brought to Kentucky to write a campaign biography for Henry Clay
Yeah,
prior to
yeah,
the election of 1832, I believe.
yeah,
And so it proved to be so popular that he was invited to become the editor of a major Whig newspaper in Louisville in the early 1830s. And of course, he would be in the chair as senior editor up till close to his death in 1870.
yeah. And I mean, very well educated. I think he went to Brown University.
Yes.
So, you know, he knew what he was doing. He was very talented.
Well,
And well, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. He was so well respected that a statue was erected in his honor in a few years after his death, and it was actually placed atop the old Courier Journal building in Louisville. Eventually, it would be placed near the entrance of the Louisville Public Library, from where, of course, it was removed in 2018. So, yeah,
Yes.
very, very famous, well, not native-born Kentuckian, but a very
But
famous
yeah,
figure in Kentucky
yeah.
history.
He came and ended up staying, right? It shows the
Yes,
Kentucky. Yeah.
yes.
He
Yeah,
came
he
for a
made
little
his
bit.
home in Louisville for the rest of his life.
Hmm. Yeah. And then so how do we like you know again? I'm coming from the perspective. I read up on Bloody Monday, did a video about Bloody Monday or Monday, and he's the bad guy.
Yes.
So
No, he's been the villain. When his statue was removed, a prominent local journalist uh, published an article in the Courier Journal stating that the statue should be blown up with dynamite. So, again, this is 2018. And so, again, still a very controversial figure and not a divisive one. Not too many people have ever attempted to defend Prentice's career. I started to look into his career while I was at the Filson Historical Society about the time the statue was removed. And I was amazed to discover that no historian nor journalist had ever bothered to read his editorials during the weeks up to the state elections, August 6th,
mhm, yeah,
55. And I was amazed to find that they told a very different story.
yeah,
Uh, just to give some quick, bullet points, one of the things that struck me is that there wasn't so much evidence of anti-Catholic bigotry
yeah,
as there was deep concerns about the possible impact of papal influence on Catholic voters in American elections. And of course, that bugbear has existed all the way into the 20th century, up to the election of John Kennedy in 1960.
yeah,
And I'm old enough to remember in my childhood and as late as the 1980s, older family members and older Kentuckians still commenting on that. We were very worried about Jack Kennedy because he was a Catholic.
yeah,
But what has caused a lot of problems for an accurate understanding of Prentice and Bloody Monday itself is a term that I use called backshadowing. The idea of papal interference in American politics as time passed after these great mass migrations before the Civil War became more and more ludicrous. So it was ludicrous during Jack Kennedy's run for the White House. It was ludicrous during Al Smith's run, Irish Catholic from New York, for the
mhm,
White House in the 1920s. It was ludicrous during the 1890s when the American Protective Association, sort of an heir to the Know Nothings, raised this issue all the time. But in the 1850s and 1840s, this was a whole new experience for Native born Americans. And these migrations occurred at a time when the divisions or the divide between Catholics and Protestants were far more sharp, wide, and deep.
mhm,
Just to give one example, Americans like to then and now boast of American exceptionalism, that we're, a fresh start, breaking
mhm,
away from old Europe and creating our own culture and civilization. Well, one thing that was brought to American shores uh, was, a lot of anti-Catholic uh, feeling,
sentiment, yeah,
yes, sentiment. And one of the most interesting examples I discovered was the celebration of Pope Day, which began in colonial New England in the 17th century. It was the American version of Guy Fawkes Day. And Guy Fawkes celebrations, traditionally, you would have an effigy of Guy Fawkes, but you would also have an effigy of the Pope. And so these effigies would be carried through the streets of British towns, London and so forth. and the people would, hurl things at the effigy of the Pope, and of course it would be thrown on the bonfire. Well, this was happening in America in some scattered locations in New England, still in the 1880s and 1890s. So I think that's one thing that needs to be brought into the equation.
Yeah.
That, their worldview was far different and more stark than our worldview, and even those of later generations of America. Another thing that has never been touched on, and it feeds directly into the Know Nothing platform, the political views of former President Millard Fillmore, who would become the Know Nothing candidate for president in 1856, John J. Crittenden, Prentice, James Harlan, who was running for Attorney General in 1855, and his young son, John Marshall Harlan, the future Chief Justice, were both members of the Kentucky Know Nothing Party. Were the events that happened in Europe in 1848, the revolutions, and the role of the papacy in crushing those revolutions. And just to cite one example, the short-lived Republic of Rome in 1848, 1849, the revolutionaries, including Garibaldi, were forced took over Rome. The Pope fled into exile, and eventually would return with a large French army, and the French Republic would fall. Now, when the Republic was in existence, the revolutionaries established freedom of the press, secular education, land distribution to the peasants, and Jews, maybe for the first time since the Middle Ages, were permitted to leave the ghettos of Rome. They were allowed to have free access to the city. When the pontiff at that time, Pius IX, returned at the head of the French army, all this was done away with. In his youth, he remembered the death and widespread destruction of the Napoleonic Wars. He believed that Republican forms of government were dangerous, not only to European monarchs, but to the Roman Catholic faith. And to him, concepts of free speech, freedom of assembly, secular education were evils. They would bring about nothing but anarchy and chaos. So Americans noticed this. Margaret Fuller, who was a member of the Transcendentalist Circle, was in Rome during all of these upheavals. She was a women's rights advocate, and she deplored, the fall of the Roman Republic. And she also, in her reports back to New York newspapers, said that she despaired of, the papacy ever supporting anything along the line of democratic republics and some of the freedoms that Americans enjoyed. So this was the number one concerns of Americans in those days, native-born Americans. And I think they had to be taken more seriously, because just to add a personal note here, when I debate politics with my friends, and they're very upset about immigrants. They were very upset about Muslim immigrants, and some of the things that they said, I would remind them. I said, the things that you're saying against Muslim immigrants are the exact same things that was being said against your Irish and German Catholic immigrants by the Know Nothing Party in the 1850s and the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. But there's nothing prior to the Know Nothing movement for Americans to look, well, we embraced this large group of people, they assimilated, and there weren't any problems. So it was a genuine concern. But what set Prentice apart, insofar as his editorials, was that he, among other things, stated that Catholic freedoms should be protected. And he stated that his only concern was about the Vatican and possible interference in elections. He advocated religious freedom for all Americans, including Muslims, Jews, and pagans, quote
Wow.
unquote. And as far as safety and violence on the eve of the election, uh, he made numerous editorial statements calling for nonviolence at the polls. And I've just selected a small example, but just
Mhm.
to share one from July 18th, 1855. In all earnestness, we appeal to the influential men of both parties not to participate in any outrage, any violation of the rights of free men, and not to dream of such madness as arming with deadly weapons. We appeal to the whole voting population that there be no thought of mortal strife and no preparations for it. Now, here's August the 4th, 2 days before
Okay.
the election. We would by all means soothe rather than inflame the public feeling, for it is by far too much inflamed already. We deprecate a collision of force as one of the greatest evils to befall our city. Every man who shall encourage or provoke strife will be acting the part of a traitor to his country and her institutions. Let us bear in mind that every human life sacrificed to the spirit of political violence or ferocity may involve the misery and destitution of a large and innocent family. There were incidents of violence against immigrants and Catholic churches in Louisville in July, and Prentice condemned those. So, what got him in trouble? Well, in the election day issue, not on the front page, not on the second page, but on the back page was a series of squibs, little 2 and 3 sentence bullet points in which,
Mhm.
the idea was to encourage voter turnout. One of them said, and I paraphrase, Americans, that's what they refer to themselves as the American Party. Americans, are you ready? I think I hear you say you are ready. Then fire and have mercy on the foes, and may God have mercy on the foes. Well, since
That
that time, that's been depicted as a banner front page headline. And
Uh-huh.
all the other prior editorials calling for peace, order, calling on the mayor for additional police presence at the poll, uh, urging the Democrats and the Know Nothings to form bipartisan poll watchers to prevent physical violence.
Mhm.
All of that was ignored over this one squib.
Oh.
And
Hmm.
so Prentice actually took to the streets during the riots and made a speech to a crowd and saved one structure from being burned. And of course, he absolutely denied in his paper. You
Mhm.
know, he denounced the violence, and he absolutely denied that that squib had anything to do with sparking the violence. And actually, when you closely examine the events of Bloody Monday, the violence that was sparked there had nothing to do with his squib or any editorials what I've been able to find.
Yeah. Well, that sounds pretty, straightforward. Um, and these I mean, when you go to look at these, Louisville journals, are they housed in Filson?
They
Or
are available pretty widely. Uh,
Mhm.
the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives have them.
Mhm.
Kentucky Historical Society have them, of course, on microfilm.
Mhm.
The Filson has them on microfilm. The Louisville Free Public Library has them on microfilm. And of course, the University of Kentucky Library also
Mhm.
has them on microfilm. And again, they're available through online sources such as newspapers.com.
Mhm.
So,
Um,
it's we saw something recently in the present political campaign that made me think of Prentice. And this was President Biden's remarks prior to the attempted assassination on Donald J. Trump, in which he said, "We have to make Trump the bullseye from this point
yeah.
onward." And of
Mhm.
course, his political opponents immediately pointed their fingers at him and said, "Well, that's what prompted the assassination attempt."
Yeah.
Same thing happened to Prentice after Bloody Monday. The other thing that I discovered is that The Louisville Journal, Courier Journal, excuse me, published an extensive article on Bloody Monday in 1897 and did not lay any blame at Prentice's feet. They blamed a forgotten Kentuckian named Blanton Duncan.
Mm.
And he was a campaign manager for Humphrey Marshall, a know nothing, who was running for Congress during the election of 1855. And when Duncan died later in California in the early 20th century, his obituary in the Courier Journal read in part, Blanton Duncan was a born agitator, and he is primarily responsible for bringing the shame of Bloody Monday down on this city. But Benedict J. Webb, who was a Catholic journalist and historian and who debated Prentice during the Know Nothing era, and they engaged in newspaper debates, when he wrote his history of Catholics in Kentucky in the late 19th century, he was the one that laid the blame at Prentice's feet, and that's poisoned historical accounts ever since, because the party that eventually owned the narrative was the Democratic Party. And of course, the Know Nothings vanished, the Whigs vanished. Those parties faded away. The Democrats owned the historical narrative about Bloody Monday ever since. And so we've never really got a historically accurate depiction of Prentice's role. And for my 2 cents, make that a nickel. No, I'll make it a nickel. We've never really gotten an accurate depiction of Bloody Monday. And the more I dig into it, the more I'm finding a similarity with the Philadelphia riots of 1844, which was also a major clash between nativists and immigrants that led to death, fire, and destruction. What happened in 1844 in Philadelphia was that there was a Native American Party procession passing through an Irish neighborhood. And some Irishmen opened fire on the procession and killed 3 nativists. And after that, all hell broke loose. And so there were several deaths on both sides. The nativists swarmed into Irish and other immigrant neighborhoods and attacked people they found on the streets, burned homes, and so forth. The same thing apparently appears to have happened in Louisville. There was a section of the city in the heart of the city called Quinn's Row, which was an Irish enclave. And according to traditional accounts, nativist mobs swarmed into the immigrant areas of the city, neighborhoods, completely unprovoked, and began to attack Irish and German residents of the city, and of course set fire to their homes, attempt to set fire to churches and Catholic businesses and so forth. Well, what appears to have actually happened is that as the election day was closing, 2 Native Americans, 2 know-nothings, were walking down the street in front of Quinn's Row. And you could tell a know-nothing party member because they had a yellow ticket in their caps or in the vest of their pocket. And an Irishman or Irishman stepped out of Quinn's Row and shot them both to death. Unarmed. Unprovoked. Well, I found an account in 1927 from an eyewitness in the Courier Journal. He said, suddenly a rider began to ride through the streets of Louisville, whipping his horse with his hat, and said that, two Americans had been shot down, by the Irish at Quinn's Row. So that's what prompted the mob to gather there. And who fired the first shot after that, that needs further digging. But unfortunately you don't want to say the Irish caused Bloody Monday because it's not fair. But the way human nature works, the Americans, when they heard this, the foreigners are killing Americans, the Irish are killing Americans. So they swarmed through the city and made unprovoked attacks and fatal attacks on many innocent people that had nothing to do with the shootings at Quinn's Row. But that was why Quinn's Row was burned to the ground and why so many people lost their lives. Of the 22 deaths, there were several Americans, quote unquote, and
Hmm.
several immigrants. So it wasn't all one sided. But most of the deaths occurred at Quinn's Row. Um, the Irish took up refuge in the rooming houses there and fired on the Native Americans on the street. Uh, a company militia was sent there to restore order, but it was just beyond their control.
Yeah, for that
And
time.
so it was burned to the ground. And Mr. Quinn himself, when he attempted to flee the burning structures, was shot dead in the doorstep. Uh, the ruins stood there for quite a number of years after Bloody Monday. But across the street was a building that in the 1880s was pockmarks with bullets fired from Quinn's Row down on the mob below. So it was a pretty intense gun battle.
Yeah.
So it's something that I always like to point out. It's far more complex and complicated than Kentuckians have been led to believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
The-
it really does need some serious historical study, in my opinion.
Yeah, and like you had said too that it's probably a lot bigger than Kentucky. I mean, you know, this wasn't just a Louisville issue. You know, it
Oh,
was all
absolutely.
over the
Yeah, there
country.
were riots elsewhere in the country, including Cincinnati, and the Know Nothing Party was pretty strong. Uh, they elected some pretty high placed individuals in the United States Congress, governorships. Uh, Interestingly, though, Prentice was late at joining the party, and in March of 1855, he penned an editorial to the Whigs of Kentucky saying, "We should wait before we decide which party to go with. Um, the Know Nothing Party appears to be very strong, and perhaps the Democratic Party, but Prentice and all the other prominent ex-Whigs who joined the Know Nothing movement felt they had no other place to go because the Republican Party, in their mind, was a sectional party that would drive the nation to civil war over the slavery issue. And the Democratic Party was rapidly becoming a sectional party that would drive the nation towards civil war over the slavery issue. And so, along with all the other editorial content in Prentice's paper during the election, was the fact that this party is the only remaining hope to save the Union and stave off civil war.
Mm.
And so, in many ways, and I know this doesn't happen in politics today, but politicians would jump on an issue to build a base and increase the party. Abraham Lincoln condemned anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic bigotry, but he schmoozed with a lot of members of the Know Nothing Party and never attacked the party because he hoped to woo Know Nothings into the Republican Party, Northern
Mhm.
Know Nothings.
Mhm.
So, politics made strange bedfellows. And I found editorials by Prentice as early as 1831 condemning Reverend Lyman Beecher, who was the leading anti Catholic Protestant cleric, uh, the father of Harriet Ward Beecher, uh, or of Uncle Tom's, uh,
Yeah.
Harriet Beecher Stowe, I'm
So
sorry.
yeah.
So, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, who wrote anti-Catholic tracts before
Mhm.
she got to Uncle Tom and the slavery issue. Prentice condemned him and his attacks on Catholic Americans as bigoted and completely out of hand. And when Winfield Scott ran for president in 1852, Scott's wife was Catholic. Of course, he's the Whig candidate. And of course, Prentice attacked the bigoted Democratic attacks on Scott for having a quote Catholic wife. But
Mhm.
again, when the political landscape changed,
Yeah. Yeah.
Prentice's public political views changed with it. And even Benedict Webb admitted in his history that Prentice was not an anti-Catholic bigot. His connection with the Know Nothings was purely a political move.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that um, the Whigs had nowhere to go, or at least they Prentice and the others were trying to find a place to go, and that they were, hesitant towards the Republicans because it would lead to civil war, and they're hesitant towards the Democrats because it would lead to the Civil War, and that's exactly what happened. Is it it led to civil war?
Yeah. So their
Um,
goal was to build a national party
mhm,
uh, that would unify the North and the South on the immigration issue, and would kind of push the slavery issue to the background and build time to stave off what they thought was, the road to civil war.
yeah,
So again, that doesn't take away from the fact that you know this is a nation of immigrants, and anti-immigrant rhetoric uh, can create great havoc in our society. But as I mentioned before, this was a first-time experience for Americans, so
mhm.
it was unavoidable for there to be some type of backlash, excuse me,
But now,
against immigrants.
let me throw this out there too, because my wheels are turning, leaning towards the good vibes of Prentice, I guess. What because if like he was like the one to blame, wouldn't you think that he would be ousted by the locals after Bloody Monday because he remains his
He remained
paper keeps
senior editor
going.
of the paper.
Uh,
Uh, his influence was waning a little bit by the time of the Civil War because many of his Whig subscribers and many of the Whig political leaders in the South were eventually turning toward the Southern rights cause. And of course, he battled alcoholism
mhm,
for most of his life, and his drinking was becoming a serious problem by 1860. But uh, he's also known for being a major champion of the Union in Kentucky during the secession crisis. And so, one of the bitter ironies of the removal of his statue in a state where you have so many Confederate monuments and so many other monuments that we now term lost cause monuments, that were erected during Jim Crow, they removed a statue to a prominent Union figure during the
uh-huh.
Civil War, and they're few and far between in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Um, so you're saying, or are you committing 100%? George Prentice is not to be blamed
No,
for
I would I would
Bloody
debate I would debate any number of people, and that Prentice has been wrongly blamed for Bloody
Monday.
Monday.
Mhm,
And again, Blanton Duncan was the one most blamed
yeah,
during the years after Prentice's death. But once he receded from public memory, then
then
Benedict Webb's conclusion, became part of the main narrative.
yeah,
Again, Prentice's editorials prior to Bloody Monday are nothing but
no
calls for
violence.
peace and order,
Mhm,
nonviolence, and had nothing to do with
mhm,
provoking violence on that day. I would say another factor that I failed to include was Humphrey Marshall made some very fiery speeches either the
mhm,
night before the election or the day of the election, and the Courier Journal feature mentioned that as well. So, and then of course, this was the era of brass knuckle politics.
yeah,
Politics in that era was a male contact sport, and so you never walked away from the polls without running the risk, or you never walked to the polls without running the risk of a black eye, broken jaw, or cracked skull. I mean, there was, if you've seen Scorsese's Gangs of New York,
but
that's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
exactly what I talk about.
yeah,
Some other individuals that were mentioned in the 1897 feature was one Hercules Walker, who was, excuse me, remembered as a man of extreme violence. I'm toasting Prentice's memory here. In antebellum Louisville, and he was a political bully.
Mhm.
So he and other know-nothings would gather around the polls and intimidate people who were trying to vote for the Democratic ticket. Of course, at the same time, there were Democratic bullies that were also assaulting and intimidating people going to vote for the Know Nothing ticket. So,
Mhm.
it was politics
Yeah.
as usual in that era. But once blood was shed, violence exploded, and it spread like a wildfire through the city. So
Yeah.
it's an American tragedy, in my opinion, more than a nativist outrage.
Yeah. Yeah, and, well, you bring up the gangs of New York, which I think that's, set in the 1860s, but still, it's the same
Yeah,
Irish Catholic, it's that whole big same drama or feud or, um, the immigrants taking jobs and so forth and
exactly. Yeah,
all that,
and of course, we heard this today during this current election. Um, Whigs felt that Henry Clay lost the presidential election in 1844 because of the foreign vote in the
Mhm.
Democratic Party. And they also felt that Franklin Pierce won the 1852 election because of the foreign vote. So that was also part of this dangerous stew that was boiling over at this particular time. But yeah, Scorsese's movies really real interesting depiction of those times. And
Mhm.
if you remember, close to the beginning of the movie, there was a fist fight between two fire companies
Yeah.
trying to put out a fire. That
Yeah.
actually happened in Louisville in the
Oh.
1850s. There was a German fire engine company and an
Oh.
American fire engine company, and they both showed up at the fire at the same time and got into a free for all. And the Americans won,
Uh-huh.
and they rolled the German fire engine into the Ohio River. So,
Oh.
so that's how toxic the environment was
Yeah.
at that particular time.
Yeah, wow. Now, another thing that, and I don't know, I'll ask you this too. Some people kind of put this, and in the video, I think I've talked about it as well. Is that the Bloody Monday incident kind of staved off the population growth of
It did.
Louisville,
Yeah.
and and that therefore Cincinnati grew bigger, and other cities did, and it was a bit of a deterrent for
Yes,
uh,
it did.
population.
Yeah, immigrants avoided Louisville for some time after that, and, it was one of the, terrible results of Bloody Monday. But again, this is ongoing research. I continue to research to this day, but in my opinion, at this juncture, there would have been no, riot of that magnitude if, there hadn't been those shootings at Quinn's Row. I think it would have just ended as a typical antebellum election with both sides claiming that they stuffed ballot boxes and both sides complaining about
Bullies
bullies
at
at
the
the
polls.
polls, brass knuckles,
Mhm.
blackjacks and clubs and rocks and things like that. But
Yeah.
I don't think there would have been any widespread violence if it hadn't been for those uh, killings in
Mhm.
front of Quinn's Row.
Yeah, well, that's crazy to think about, and with elections and stuff like back 100 years ago, 150 years ago, it was crazy. You know,
Oh yeah.
each party or each candidate had their people out there trying to push people to vote the way they wanted them to.
Well,
Um,
Irwin Cobb, the Kentucky humorist, once had an editorial, I think, in the early 20th century, and it went something to the effect uh, Election day was a miracle in Kentucky. No one was killed at the polls. So election day violence was,
oh,
still pretty common, into the early
yeah.
20th century.
Oh gosh. Woo, man. Yeah. Well, anything else on Prentice?
I have,
I mean,
yeah,
there's a bunch, but
yeah.
um,
I think I pretty much laid out my
made your
working
case.
thesis and conclusions. If anybody contacts the podcast and
Mhm.
wants to reach out to me, or has criticisms or whatever, any critiques, feel free to share my email with them.
Yeah, I will. Well,
I'd be happy to dialogue.
Daniel Burge, he's a Prentice. He's dug into Prentice some, but I think he's focused more on like the Civil War articles and stuff.
Yes, yes.
Um, but yeah, there's people out there that you know about Prentice, and like he's just a unique character. I mean, he is. Um,
No, he was really a force in journalism and politics in his era, uh, every much as Henry Watterson was in the post-Civil War era.
yeah.
So, the Courier Journal was fortunate to having two really powerhouse uh, political editors
Mhm.
during the course of the newspaper's history.
Yeah, and it's so ironic that they eventually become the Courier Journal, or yeah, they come together. Um, yeah, well, sure, I might have to make a new video and go back and I have to go back and watch the Bloody Monday video that I did and see. It's been a while since I've did it. See what
Yeah, I
refresh
might
myself.
go through your library and watch that one myself.
Well, thanks again for coming on and talking to us about old George Prentice. Again, such a good character of Kentucky history, or a good person to discuss. Yeah. Anything else coming up on the horizon for you? Anything you got new coming out, or?
Right now, I'm working on a book on about guerrilla warfare in eastern Kentucky during the Civil War,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm about to submit a book-length manuscript to the University Press of Kentucky on the first years of the war in eastern Kentucky in 1861 and 1862, and I'm going to largely focus on the pro-Southern or pro-Confederate leaders, because when you consider it's an area that uh, slavery was not deeply entrenched or widespread, who were they? What were they saying? Why did they feel that Kentucky mountaineers should side with the Confederacy? So that's breaking new ground as well.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. Keep plugging away.
As long as I draw Beth, that's how I'm going to spend the rest of my days. So,
All right. Well, sounds good. Thanks for coming on again, and thank you all for listening. And we'll see you next time.
okay, you're very welcome. Good to see you, and have a good night.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The the assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.